Imagine stumbling upon a story so gripping, you can't look away. Well, you just did. But the journey doesn't stop here. Tomorrow, we're dropping another mind blowing tale you won't want to miss. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing our community grow across the globe. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're the first to catch our next jaw dropping story. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. See you in the comments and back here tomorrow. Caught on camera, the manager's dark secret finally exposed. Jason Cole had always believed that being a leader wasn't just about making decisions from an office. It was about knowing the people who made everything work, the ones behind the scenes who turned his vision into reality. That's why, every few months, he walked into Cole's Prime, his own restaurant in Los Angeles, not as a celebrity, not as the owner, but as a regular customer. No fanfare, no special treatment, just a man in a hoodie and jeans, stepping into his own business like any other guest. Tonight was one of those nights. The moment Jason walked through the doors, he was hit with the warm, familiar scent of grilled steaks and garlic butter. The restaurant was alive with energy. The Friday night rush was in full swing, servers balancing trays of cocktails and sizzling ribeye, customers engaged in conversation under the golden glow of dimmed lights. At first glance, everything seemed perfect, just as he had always envisioned it. But Jason knew better than to trust appearances. He had worked in the industry long enough to understand that a restaurant wasn't just about great food or a packed dining room. It was about the people who ran it. And sometimes, the real story wasn't told through profit margins or glowing reviews. It was whispered in the break rooms, hidden in exhausted sighs after a long shift, or buried in the tight-lipped expressions of employees who couldn't speak their truth. As he moved toward the bar, his trained eyes scanned the room, picking up details others might have missed. The servers were efficient, but there was an underlying tension in their movements. Conversations among staff were brief, almost guarded. And then there was Russell Grant, the restaurant manager, standing near the host station. He was in his mid-40s, sharply dressed and completely still, watching everything a little too closely. Not just supervising, but controlling. Something felt off. Jason wasn't sure what it was yet, but his instincts told him to stay. That's when he heard it, a soft, muffled sound coming from the hallway near the kitchen. He barely noticed at first, but as he stepped past, the sound became clearer. Someone was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, the kind of quiet, restrained cry of someone desperately trying not to break. Jason stopped in his tracks. Something was wrong, and he wasn't leaving until he found out what. Jason's footsteps slowed as he turned his head slightly toward the break room door. It was cracked open, just enough for him to see inside. A young woman, Sarah, according to her name tag, stood with her back to the door, gripping the edge of a metal counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her shoulders trembled, her breaths uneven, like she was trying to hold herself together. Beside her, Mike, a fellow server, stood close, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Jason couldn't hear every word, but he caught fragments. "You can't let him. He doesn't own you." Sarah shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "What choice do I have? He made it clear. If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Jason's jaw tightened. At first, he thought maybe it was about a customer. Maybe someone had harassed her. But the way she said it, this wasn't about some random guest. This was about someone inside the restaurant, someone with power over her. His grip tightened around the glass of water the bartender had set in front of him. He kept his face neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. Then, he glanced across the room and locked eyes with Russell Grant. The manager still stood near the hostess station, arms crossed, scanning the restaurant like he was surveying his kingdom. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he carried himself, an air of quiet control, the kind that made people careful about how they moved around him. Jason turned his attention back toward the break room just as Mike stepped out, his face tense, his hands fidgeting as he adjusted the notepad tucked into his apron. Jason saw an opportunity. Casually, he stood and walked toward the server station near the back, where Mike was busy stacking plates. "Hey, man," Jason said, keeping his voice low. "Got a pen?" Mike looked up startled, then nodded quickly. "Yeah, sure." he said, grabbing one from the counter and handing it over. Jason took it but didn't walk away. Instead, he glanced at Mike's name tag. "Mike?" he said evenly. "I couldn't help but notice. Your friend back there seems upset." Mike stiffened, his grip on the plates tightening. "She's fine," he said too quickly. Jason tilted his head slightly. "She doesn't look fine." Mike swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the front of the restaurant, toward Russell, before dropping to the floor. There it was, that instinctive fear. After a long pause, Mike exhaled sharply. "She's not fine," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Jason studied him, watching the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers kept gripping the notepad at his waist. The kid wanted to talk, he just wasn't sure if he could. "Is it a customer issue?" Jason asked carefully. Mike hesitated. That pause told Jason everything. "No," Mike muttered. It's not." His eyes flicked toward Russell again. The man was still watching the room like he owned it. Jason had been around long enough to recognize what was happening. Sarah wasn't just upset, she was scared. And whatever was going on, Russell was at the center of it. This wasn't just about a bad work environment. This was something much worse. Jason could feel it now. This wasn't just a rough night at work. This was fear. And fear like that didn't come from long shifts or difficult customers. It came from something deeper, something dangerous. He kept his expression neutral as he casually leaned against the counter, keeping his voice low. "How long has she been working here?" he asked. Mike hesitated, glancing toward the front of the restaurant again before answering. "A little over a year." Then he tensed. "Why?" Jason shrugged, keeping his tone light. "Just wondering if she likes it here." Mike let out a short, humorless chuckle. "She doesn't," he admitted, "but she can't afford to leave." There it was. The real problem. Sarah wasn't just having a bad night. She was trapped. Jason's gut tightened. He had seen this before. People stuck in situations they couldn't escape, forced to put up with things no one should have to endure. And now he was looking at one of them. Before he could press further, Jason noticed Mike's entire posture shift. His back straightened, his hands moved quickly, pretending to focus on stacking plates. Jason didn't need to turn around to know why. The air changed, thick with something unspoken. A shadow loomed beside them. "Everything okay over here?" The voice was smooth but firm, controlled. Jason finally turned, meeting Russell Grant's gaze up close for the first time. The man was in his mid-40s, wearing a crisp navy blue shirt. His hair was neatly combed, his sharp features unreadable. This wasn't just a strict boss. This was someone who knew exactly how much power he had, and enjoyed it. Mike immediately dropped his gaze, busying himself with the plates in front of him. "Yes, sir," he said quickly, "just helping a customer." Jason didn't break eye contact with Russell. "Yeah," he said, offering a polite smile. "Mike here was kind enough to lend me a pen." Russell's eyes flicked to the pen in Jason's hand. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He clapped Mike on the shoulder, just a little too firmly. "Let's stay focused on work," he said. Mike barely nodded. "Yes, sir?" Jason clenched his jaw but didn't react. Not yet. Russell held his gaze for a moment longer before turning and walking away, scanning the restaurant as if he were making sure everything was still under his control. Jason exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He thanked Mike and stepped away, feeling Russell's eyes on him the entire time. His mind was already made up. He wasn't leaving. Not until he figured out exactly what was happening inside this restaurant. Jason stepped outside, letting the cool night air cut through the frustration building inside him. From where he stood, it probably looked like he was just checking his phone. In reality, his mind was racing. Something wasn't adding up. Sarah was terrified. Mike was hesitant. And Russell? That man carried himself like he owned everyone in that building. Jason had met men like him before, the kind who thrived on control, who pushed boundaries just far enough so their victims felt powerless to stop them. If he wanted real answers, he needed to talk to someone who wasn't afraid. As if on cue, the restaurant's side door swung open, and Ethan, the bartender, stepped outside for a break. He leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to Jason watching him. Jason saw his opening. He walked up casually, hands in his pockets. "Long night?" Ethan looked up, startled, then relaxed when he recognized him. "Yeah, Fridays are always crazy," Jason nodded. "Mind if I ask you something?" Ethan hesitated but shrugged. "Sure." Jason kept his voice light. Your manager, Russell? What's he like? For a split second, Ethan's expression darkened. It was quick, just a flicker, but Jason caught it. He's strict, Ethan said carefully. Likes things done a certain way. Jason tilted his head. That normal for managers? Ethan exhaled, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then he lowered his voice. He's not just strict, he's... Ethan struggled for the right word, then finally said something that made Jason's stomach turn. He makes Sarah stay late, alone. Jason's muscles tensed. She's the only one? Ethan nodded. Yeah, and he's always talking to her like she owes him something. I've seen it, man. The way she tenses up when he calls her into his office? It's not normal. Jason forced himself to stay calm. He had seen this before. Men in power playing games, singling out the vulnerable, making them feel like they had no choice. She ever say anything about it? Jason asked. Ethan shook his head. No, but she doesn't have to. We all see it. Jason exhaled slowly. Now he knew. This wasn't just a toxic boss. This was a predator, and that changed everything. Thanks for telling me, Jason said, patting Ethan on the shoulder. You're a good guy. Ethan gave a small, uneasy smile. Jason turned back toward the building. Sarah was still inside, still under Russell's control, and now Jason knew exactly what he needed to do. Jason pushed open the glass doors and walked back inside. Cole's prime, his jaw tight, his mind set. The dinner rush had died down, leaving fewer customers, fewer witnesses. But Russell was still there, standing near the server stations, arms crossed, scanning the room like he owned it. Jason didn't hesitate. He moved across the floor with steady, deliberate steps, his focus locked on Sarah. She was mid-conversation with a customer, her voice steady but mechanical, her hands moving through the motions of service. But her eyes, they were hollow, distant, like someone trying to disappear in plain sight. She saw Jason approaching and tensed slightly, as if expecting trouble. Excuse me, Jason said, his voice calm but firm. I need to speak with you for a moment. Sarah blinked, confused. I'm with a customer, sir. The woman she was serving frowned. She's helping me right now. You can wait. But Jason didn't take his eyes off Sarah. It's important. She hesitated, glancing at the customer, then back at Jason. Something in his tone, something in his presence made her step away. That's when Russell noticed. Jason saw him straighten, his eyes narrowing. He didn't like losing control. Sarah led Jason a few steps away, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. What can I help you with, sir? She asked quietly. Jason took a slow breath. I know what's happening. Sarah flinched, just a flicker, a half-second reaction, but Jason caught it. You don't have to say anything, he continued, keeping his voice low. I just need you to know you're not alone. Her fingers curled into fists. Fear. That's what this was. And fear meant she believed she had no way out. I don't know what you mean, she whispered. Jason didn't let up. Russell, the late shifts, the way he treats you. I know it's not okay. Sarah swallowed hard, her breath shaky. I can't. You can, Jason said firmly. And you will. Because I promise you, he's not untouchable. Before Sarah could respond, a shadow loomed beside them. Russell. His expression was cool, controlled, but his eyes were sharp with irritation. Is there a problem here? His voice was polite, but Jason could hear the warning beneath it. He didn't turn to face Russell immediately. Instead, he watched Sarah, watched how she shrank slightly at the sound of his voice, how her fingers clenched around the hem of her apron. That reaction told Jason everything. Now he turned. Just having a conversation, Jason said, his voice steady. Russell's smirk didn't reach his eyes. Well, Sarah has a job to do. She doesn't have time for private discussions. Jason caught the way Sarah flinched at the word private. That was all the confirmation he needed. His stance shifted just slightly, squaring his shoulders, making his presence take up more space. Actually, Jason said, his voice calm but unwavering, I think we should have a conversation right now. Russell's smirk faltered. Excuse me? Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. With a flick of his wrist, he flipped it open, revealing his executive ownership credentials for Cole's Prime. Sarah gasped. Nearby servers froze. Russell's face drained of color. Jason met his eyes. My name is Jason Cole, he said, his tone smooth as steel, and you and I need to talk. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like something wasn't quite right? That's exactly what happened to Jason Cole when he stepped into his own restaurant. What would you have done in his shoes? Would you have spoken up or played it safe? We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from a big city, a small town, or somewhere unexpected? And more importantly, what are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a toxic workplace? If you were Sarah, what would you have done? Let's keep this conversation going. Your voice matters, and stories like this remind us why speaking up is so important. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we've got another powerful story coming your way. You won't want to miss it. Now, let's hear it. What's your take on tonight's story? Type it out in the comments below.